A name like Geezer Butler doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be the center of attention. Heavy Metal, an album produced in 3 days with a dark, deep sound, would never have been born had he not been a part of Black Sabbath. With lyrics that evoked foreboding visions of conflict, mortality, and unfairness, themes that rock music shied away from addressing during that era. But Butler exposed them in all their unfiltered glory. Butler was more than simply the bassist, he was born into the rubble of the post-war era. Black Sabbath's intellect and spirit resided in him. The whole heavy metal subgenre was influenced by his ominous tunes and evocative lyrics. The album's sales surpassed 70 million. An incredible quantity, but what Butler has left behind goes much beyond records. His legacy lives on. Despite all that glitz, Black Sabbath was far from a bed of roses. Court fights that dragged on for decades, clandestine tensions, and sudden exits. Black Sabbath was once a close-knit family, but they eventually drifted away. The band was never the same when Butler left, even if he rarely spoke out. Was Geezer Butler, then, an unspoken mastermind or an indispensable character? Was he Black Sabbath's immortal spirit or merely a cog in the wheel of a legendary machine? Let's delve inside Geezer Butler's turbulent journey, where victory and defeat have always been intertwined. Childhood and teenage years. Aston, Birmingham was an industrial, gray-stained district where Geezer Butler was born on July 17, 1949. The war had passed, but its scars lingered on every wall. He came from a working-class Irish family that had to scrape by on low salaries. Mary Butler spent her life caring for their 7 children, while her husband, James, was a technical laborer after serving in the Royal Scots Regiment. Mary had a background as a nanny. Winters were so severely cold that Butler's family would cluster together on an old, worn-out bed to stay warm, and the house they grew up in didn't have hot water or a telephone. There were times when tea and dry bread were the only things on the menu. Butler discovered a way to escape through books, despite the lack of luxury and encouragement for music. He lost himself in the works of great writers like Homer, Shakespeare, and S.F. The world, he realized at an early age, was more than simply poverty, conflict, and the difficulties of working-class life. It was also something larger, more sinister, and somehow beautiful. He famously claimed, "I never went a day without reading something." Those formative years would eventually inform the profoundly philosophical and contemplative lyrics of Black Sabbath's music. However, Butler's youth was not without its share of noisy adventures. He had no choice but to attend Mass on a regular basis because his family was deeply Catholic. However, his doubts about religion deepened as he matured. Not even to pray did he visit a church. On Sunday, he went to see the girls dressed for church. He never returned to a church after an insult from a nun, who called him a little girl, made him feel unwelcome. It wasn't his decision to be called Geezer. His older brother had inherited it from his time spent serving in the army with fellow London Cockneys. He used the slang term geezer, which is comparable to dude or mate, to describe people whenever he got back to his house. It didn't take long for young Butler to pick up the habit, and his pals had already permanently nicknamed him. At that very second, Geezer Butler came into our world. Despite not having musical parents, Butler always had a gift for music. It wasn't a serious profession in his father's eyes. Butler couldn't care less that his mother wanted him to be financially secure. He was determined to chart his own course for the future. A pivotal occurrence thereafter altered the course of his life irrevocably. Birmingham hosted a Beatles concert in 1963. John Lennon and Paul McCartney, 2 regular guys, sent the world into a frenzy that night as they commanded the stage and sent thousands of screaming fans into a frenzy. A teenage boy stood among them, his eyes wide with astonishment. On that particular night, though, Butler wasn't the sole spectator. There was another adolescent who was as enthralled. Someone Butler had never encountered before, a strange outcast with wild, feral eyes. Osborne, John Ozzy was his name. They had no idea that a few short years later they would be co-authors of heavy metal's most illustrious annals. Geezer Butler's early career was marred by a lack of natural bass talent. He began his musical career as a rhythm guitarist, whose influences included Jimi Hendrix, Cream, the Kinks, and the Beatles. However, heavy metal was not an effortless journey. It started with a crushing setback. With the formation of the rare breed in 1967 came a new identity and an opportunity for Butler and Ozzy Osbourne to distinguish themselves, but the band quickly broke up. A vision that had only just begun to materialize was already broken. But that didn't stop Butler. At the next available chance, he made the most of it. He rejoined Ozzy's band, Polka-Tot Blues Band, alongside Tony Iommi and Bill Ward. No, this blues band wasn't like the others. Their sound was distinct from anything that had come before. It was heavier, darker, and energetic. Earth was their new moniker, but it wasn't powerful enough. Then, in 1969, Butler proposed another moniker, Black Sabbath. Motivated by the slasher flick starring Boris Karloff. A moniker befitting the band's evolving sound, one that conjures images of shadows and mystery. I had to make a sacrifice in order to become Black Sabbath. It was Tony Iommi's desire that the band not have two guitarists. Butler was forced to play bass, an instrument he had no prior experience with. Not a single tool or piece of experience on his own. With the help of a friend, he obtained a 3-string bass and dove headfirst into studying. Still, Butler quickly became an expert bassist and one of Black Sabbath's signature instruments. The unique sound he created was the result of fusing Iommi's razor-sharp riffs with his deep, dark lines. Rock music would never be the same after the birth of Black Sabbath a year later. Achieving professional success. A paradigm change jolted the music industry in 1970. Black Sabbath's debut album introduced a new, unprecedented sound, heavy, ominous, and eerie. Tony Iommi's blistering guitars and Ozzy Osbourne's creepy vocals certainly didn't make them a hit, though. From the wailing bass lines that sounded like hell's heartbeat to the savage lyrics that reflected the world's anarchy, there was a silent figure behind it all who was molding the band's spirit. Geezer Butler was that man. Everyone agrees that Black Sabbath's 1970 album Paranoid was a game-changer. War Pigs was a terrifying anti-war cry, Iron Man became one of heavy metal's timeless anthems, and Paranoid, a song created in 3 hours as album filler, became the band's biggest hit surprise. However, behind these scenes, Butler was the storyteller, elevating Black Sabbath to the status of an indisputable rock powerhouse. War, religion, social deterioration, and the concerns that people try to bury were all themes in his songs, which were more than simply resistance. Nonetheless, not everyone was prepared to accept them. Because of their ominous reputation and religiously themed lyrics, Black Sabbath was unfairly labeled as devil's music in the United States. On multiple occasions, Butler clarified that Black Sabbath does not promote black magic. On the contrary, they were sounding the alarm about the perils of it. Despite this, many continued to assume they were Satan's agents due to their name and the lyrics of songs like Black Sabbath and After Forever. Their rise to legendary status was unaffected by the labels people gave them. They solidified their domination with subsequent albums. Reign of Truth, 1971. Brought about a sea change in heavy music when, with their instruments tuned to C-sharp, Butler and Iommi created a darker, heavier tone that would later form the basis of doom metal. With its daring experiments with song forms and soundscapes, Volume 4, 1972, was a creative high point. Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, released in 1973, greatly expanded their sound, combining their distinctive gloom with complex harmonies. But that wasn't all Butler could do. He revolutionized heavy metal bass playing. The bass is now an essential component of the main melody, rather than just a background beat that he provided. The band's sound benefited from his innovative use of a wah-wah pedal, which he pioneered among bassists. By lowering his bass strings, he achieved Sabbath's distinctive deep, crushing tone, a technique he also helped pioneer, detuning. The most crucial thing is that he and Iommi created a special harmony where the bass and guitar were no longer played independently but rather blended together, creating a crushing doom effect that drew listeners into a terrifying realm of beauty and anarchy. Butler was informed of the band's decision to terminate him by Bill Ward, who visited his house in 1977. A chilly conclusion, no discussion, no explanation. However, Ward contacted him again, requesting his return, just a few weeks later. Iommi and Osbourne both denied decision-making when Butler challenged them. Even though he had returned, some of his faith had been shattered beforehand. Butler temporarily departed 2 years later in response to Ozzy's dismissal in order to address the disintegration of his marriage. After reuniting with bassist Craig Gruber in 1980, Black Sabbath continued working with Ronnie James Dio on their 1980 album Heaven and Hell. Regardless of their feelings towards him, Black Sabbath still relied on Butler, as he returned before the album's release to re-record all of the bass parts. Lots of people came and went in the years that followed. Butler departed in 1984, returned, and departed once more in 1994. He would always be connected to Black Sabbath, no matter what. After collaborating with Osbourne on 1995's Osmosis, he joined G/Z/R and released Plastic Planet as a solo artist, but destiny repeatedly drew him back. He played bass for Black Sabbath again in 1997 at OS Fest and stayed with the band until they disbanded. January 2016 saw the start of Black Sabbath's farewell tour, which lasted until February 2017. Almost half a century of history came to a close. The preceding album, 13, was released in 2013 by Butler, Iommi, and Osbourne. Songwriting wasn't as natural as it had been previously. Worries about religion and war, which had plagued him since infancy, had evaporated. There was less activity in Butler's life. Still, 13 was a huge hit, and it was the last time Black Sabbath topped the charts before they retired for forever. From Birth to Black Sabbath and Beyond, his memoir Into the Void recounts the highs and lows of his life, which was released in 2023. After a long period of obscurity, the book catapulted him back into the limelight. After that, he shocked everyone in June 2024 by showing up unannounced to a Foo Fighters concert in Birmingham. A fleeting glimpse, but a constant reminder that Geezer Butler is not far away. An iconic figure in heavy metal's history. Upon reflection, it is impossible to ignore Butler's contributions outside his role as bassist for Black Sabbath. He embodied it completely. Would Black Sabbath have achieved their current level of fame if Butler hadn't been involved? Would heavy metal have been possible without the dark, foreboding bass lines he created? No amount of albums or tours can tell you the truth. Butler's influence is palpable in every deep, rumbling note of heavy metal, and this is something that new bassists can't help but notice whenever they take up an instrument. Private life. As Geezer Butler famously put it, family is everything, even though music is intrinsic to his being. Still, it wasn't cheap to strike a balance between the two. The life of a heavy metal star was marked by marriages, turbulent relationships, and disagreements that lasted decades. Butler first laid eyes on Georgina during a class dance at Birmingham's Holte Grammar School when they were both teenagers. His first love was more than a passing fancy, it provided stability as he battled through his formative years. Back when Black Sabbath was just a name in the ether and Butler was a broke young man with music as his ambition, Georgina was there. However, the rapid ascent to stardom came at a high cost. An unseen chasm formed between them as a result of the constant demands of rock and roll traveling. Despite Butler's best efforts, the couple filed for a divorce in 1980. He finally came to terms with the fact that his marriage was hopeless and that the past was finally closed. On September 16, 1978, 2 years prior to the dissolution of his first marriage, Butler had another tragic meeting. He met Gloria, his future wife, manager, counselor, and most important career partner, at the Checker Dome in St. Louis, the night before a Black Sabbath show. Gloria helped Butler find stability during his tumultuous years, while Georgina represented the happy days of childhood. Together, they formed a family, overcame obstacles in music and in life beyond the stage, and withstood the storms of fame. The first son of the Butler family, Biff, followed his firmly held Catholic religion to become the lead vocalist of the band Apartment 26, while the second son, Biff Jr., followed a different route. James Butler, the youngest, on the other hand, went in an entirely other direction. He moved to London after earning a degree in social sciences from Oxford and adopted radical left-wing politics. While Butler sought refuge in religion as a child of poverty, his youngest son had an incredibly privileged upbringing and saw the world through a very different prism, as Butler reflected on his own life. But family was still Butler's first priority, even though they had different views. I admire his statement that every generation has its own unique perspective on the world. But Butler's sympathy remained constant. Butler adhered to the vegetarian diet religiously from an early age. He once owned a dog named Scamp, and he loved that dog more than anyone else. He never lost his affection for animals, no matter how old he got. Cats in particular were commonplace in the Butler household, and he often posted photos of them online. He became a vegan in the 1990s for ethical and health reasons, but also because he thought people should not hurt animals. He was a vocal opponent of animal abuse, and the foie gras trade in particular, in a 2009 PETA ad campaign. He averred angrily, "I've seen a lot of absurd things in my life, but it's horrifying to witness these poor birds suffering just so their diseased livers can be sold in stores." However, Butler's world was never actually peaceful, regardless of how much he sought it. Georgina was not Gloria Butler. A strategist, she advised him on career management and was essential in shaping his professional choices. She was more than just his wife. Unfortunately, this led Butler into an unwelcome conflict with Sharon Osbourne, who had complete control over Ozzy Osbourne's career, and he had no choice but to fight. Sharon versus Gloria. Opposing tactics, two powerful characters. Butler and Ozzy's long-term friendship started to crumble when they couldn't live together. After a while, the talks died down, and then there was complete quiet. The two longtime friends eventually drifted away, according to Butler, even though there was never any animosity between him and Ozzy on a personal level. The Black Sabbath controversy, however, did not end with this. The band's drug and alcohol use, as well as its interpersonal conflicts, were reaching a breaking point by the late 1970s. As Ozzy Osbourne's unruliness worsened, it had an impact on both his recording sessions and his live performances. In 1979, the band's de facto leader Tony Iommi finally had enough and fired Ozzy. Even if he didn't personally make the choice, Butler nonetheless supported it. Not long after that, he took a temporary break from the band as well to address the problems in his marriage. Tony Iommi was sued by Ozzy Osbourne in 2009 for the right to use the Black Sabbath name. Even though he wasn't personally involved, he was nevertheless subject to the lawsuit as a result of selling his stock to Iommi while holding onto a quarter of the band's earnings. A true healing of the past wounds never occurred, despite their subsequent reunion and 2013 recording of 13. Butler was normally a peaceful person, but he would never stand for abuse toward his family. Gloria was the target of an insult in 2015 while she was out in a California pub. Butler wasted no time acting. His arrest for violence and public intoxication followed his knockout blow that rendered the man unconscious. He was released from jail after paying a fee, but he did spend one night behind bars. Those close to him knew what had happened, even though he rarely discussed it. Except when someone threatened his family, he remained a peaceful man. Butler, after all that, managed to strike a balance between his public life and his private life. Peace, a life with his wife and sons, his cherished cats, and his everlasting love of music were his choices after decades of disputes, lawsuits, and defeats. A safe haven where he could let his guard down and be himself, free from the burden of his past conflicts. In his current life and legacy, Geezer Butler isn't interested in becoming the center of attention. He stops wasting time and energy on pointless tours and arguments. Along with Gloria in Los Angeles, he has opted for a new cadence, one that is less hectic and more serene. However, his retreat should not be interpreted as a total retreat. Butler isn't the type to just let go. A large portion of his life is still devoted to music, football, and animals. Since the 1990s, he has adhered to a vegetarian diet. In 2009, he became a spokesperson for PETA, fiercely fighting for the rights of animals. Cutting off meat wasn't merely an individual decision, it was a way of life for him. However, many are surprised to learn that Butler rarely uses profanity. This appears quite unlikely in a field where the use of profanity is commonplace. He mentioned that he was severely punished the one and only time he cursed in front of his father when he was a kid, which made him afraid to swear again. Football is Butler's second great love, second only to music. Along with Tony Iommi, he is a devoted supporter of Aston Villa. While others delivered formal remarks at Black Sabbath's 2006 Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, Butler merely seized the microphone and yelled, "Next Villa." A brief statement, but pure old-fashioned Butler. Just doing what he loves without any airs or pretension. Music is still an integral part of his life, even though he has left the stage. Into the Void, his autobiography detailing his rise from a poor Aston youngster to heavy metal icon, was published in 2023. There was more to the novel than meets the eye. The performance was an ode to his devoted fan base, who had supported him through the years. He still has the ability to electrify an audience, despite the fact that he does not perform frequently anymore. During a Foo Fighters performance in Birmingham in June 2024, he unexpectedly made an appearance. A surprising comeback serves as a timely reminder that rock legend Geezer Butler is very much alive and well. Am I reading the last chapter now? I highly doubt it. Though he has retired from performing, Butler has left an enduring impression. When he considers everything he has achieved, he may have finally discovered the life he has always wanted: a quiet existence, an eternal profession, and a family that sticks by his side. Along with being Black Sabbath's bassist, Geezer Butler was also the lyricist responsible for some of the band's most memorable songs. More than just a musician, he was instrumental in shaping a whole musical style. While Tony Iommi's crushing riffs served as the band's basis, Black Sabbath's soul belonged to Butler, transforming those noises into an eerie, all-encompassing performance. He had a way with words beyond mere songs. War, religion, human anxieties, and the future were all themes that ran through their contemplations. Album after album by Black Sabbath, Paranoid, Master of Reality, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath, and so on laid the groundwork for heavy metal. Composed in only 3 hours, Paranoid went on to become one of the most iconic rock songs of all time. It wasn't just songwriting, though, that Butler impacted. In heavy metal, he was a game-changer for bass players. His innovative usage of the wah-wah pedal, which he pioneered, gave doom metal and stoner rock their signature sound. Additionally, he was an early proponent of detuning, achieving the dark, foreboding tone that would come to characterize metal by bringing down his bass strings to C-sharp. From Alice in Chains to Metallica, Iron Maiden, Pantera, and numerous more, his daring inventions served as an inspiration to innumerable musicians. Butler left an incalculable legacy, and that's not even taking into account his many accomplishments. Numerous albums by Black Sabbath have been certified platinum or gold, and their total sales exceed 70 million. Both the UK Music Hall of Fame in 2005 and the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 2006 honored Butler and the band, solidifying their status as everlasting rock legends. However, his most lasting impact may not be measured by accolades or statistics. The key is in how he revolutionized music appreciation around the globe. Butler, who came from humble beginnings as a young man living on the gritty streets of Aston, went on to reshape heavy metal as we know it. In pursuit of fleeting stardom, he was never outspoken or pure of heart. However, his legacy does not necessitate sweeping declarations. One may hear the reverberation of a bass line. Lyrics stick in the mind of the listener. They are aware that it is Geezer Butler. An outstanding bassist is only one of Geezer Butler's many talents. Black Sabbath and heavy metal are nothing without him. Has made an everlasting impression from his humble beginnings in Aston to his blistering performances on stages around the globe. The lasting impression an artist makes is more important than any amount of financial success or critical acclaim they may receive. Perhaps Black Sabbath would still be around if Butler hadn't been involved, but it would lack the intensity, sinister undertones, and defiant ideology that define it now. His music continues to inspire even if he is no longer a public figure, performs to sold-out audiences, or toils away in the studio, lasting in the memories of countless listeners and touching the chords of every song. He has had a significant impact on many generations of musicians, including Metallica, Pantera, Iron Maiden, and Alice in Chains. Butler was never the type to go after short-lived celebrity, but his impact will live on forever. When Geezer Butler's music starts rumbling and lyrics start etching themselves into the listener's brain, they know it's him. One last question, nevertheless, has not been resolved. Is there going to be a final performance by him? Is it possible that Black Sabbath may never play together again with their iconic lineup? The answer is still a mystery to the fans. I appreciate you sticking around to the very end of the video. Be sure to press the subscribe button so you won't miss any future videos if you enjoy hearing the unseen stories of rock superstars. There is more greatness in store.